Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are cracking open a really tough economic case, Mexico's trade balance. To help us out, we're going to lean on a super interesting 2019 study by Carrasco and Tovar-García that really gets to the bottom of the numbers.
All right, so let's get right to it. This is the big question. I mean, on paper, Mexico's become this absolute export machine. But for some reason, its overall trade balance with most of the world is, well, it's still in the red. How is that possible? What's really going on?
So this whole story really kicks off back in the mid-'80s. That's when Mexico started to seriously open up its economy. Then boom, 1994, NAFTA hits, and things go into overdrive. From there, it just kept going, building this huge web of trade deals all across the globe.
And would you look at the results? It's just explosive. Foreign trade went from being about 30% of the entire economy to more than 78% by 2016. I mean, that is a night and day transformation. It's absolutely massive.
But, and this is a huge but, here's the twist. For every dollar in exports that started flowing out, another dollar in imports seemed to flow right back in. And that's what created this nagging trade deficit we're trying to figure out. It left everyone scratching their heads. Why didn't this export explosion lead to a big trade surplus?
Okay, so like any good detective story, when you have a mystery, you have to round up the usual suspects. And in economics, there are two go-to explanations for things like this.
First up, you've got relative income. It's pretty straightforward, right? Your trading partners get richer, their economies grow, and they buy more of your stuff. Simple. Then there's the real exchange rate. The idea here is that if your currency, the peso in this case, gets cheaper, your products suddenly look like a great deal to the rest of the world and your exports should climb.
And this is right where the study we're looking at starts to shake things up. The researchers had a hunch that these two classic theories, as solid as they seem, just weren't giving us the full picture for Mexico. Something was missing.
So the investigation takes a really interesting turn here. The researchers bring in a new clue, something that goes way beyond just counting the total value of what's being sold. They decided to look at the kind of goods being exported.
And here is the central idea of their whole paper. They're basically saying, hey, maybe what you sell matters just as much, if not more, than how much you sell. The actual mix of products could be the key that unlocks this whole mystery.
And when you look at that mix, whoa, the change is just staggering. Back in 1990, oil was a third of Mexico's exports. Fast forward to 2016, and it's barely a blip. Meanwhile, manufactured goods completely took over, making up almost 90% of everything they sold abroad. It's just an unbelievable pivot.
And if you slice up that manufacturing pie, it gets even more interesting. We're not just talking about simple stuff here. A huge chunk of these exports are what we'd call medium-high and high-technology goods. Things like sophisticated electronics, advanced auto parts, even components for the aerospace industry.
Now, the theory goes that selling these kinds of high-tech products should be a massive win. Why? Well, there's less competition, and they aren't as vulnerable to sudden price drops. So, logically, a country that sells a lot of these advanced goods should have a really healthy trade balance. It just makes sense.
So now we've got our old suspects and this new clue, the export composition. The researchers crunched 26 years of data across 39 of Mexico's trading partners. So, what did they find? What's the verdict?
Okay, so here's where it gets wild. The findings really did turn some old ideas on their head. First, relative income, that idea that richer partners buy more, the study found no real evidence for it. The exchange rate, though, that one checked out. A cheaper peso definitely helps. But our hot new clue, high-tech exports, it had an effect, yeah, but it was surprisingly weak. Let's just break that down one more time. Suspect number 1, relative income, totally exonerated, not guilty. Suspect number 2, the exchange rate, guilty as charged. It plays a role, just like the textbooks say. But our new clue, the high-tech goods, it's an accomplice, I guess. The connection is there, but it's way, way weaker than anybody thought. And that is the final twist in this puzzle.
Right. That weak link with high-tech exports is what brings this whole thing home. It leads us straight to the final and most important piece of the puzzle, which we can call the maquiladora mystery. This is the key question that unlocks everything. You have this country that completely reinvented itself to export complex, high-value products, and the big payoff for its trade balance is kind of a dud. Why? What's going on?
And the answer comes down to something called the maquiladora effect.
See, a huge part of Mexico's industry is based on assembly. They import really valuable parts. Think microchips, engines, complex sensors, put them all together and then export the finished product. So even though the final car or TV has a high price tag, most of that money just flows right back out to pay for the imported components. The actual value created inside Mexico is surprisingly small.
The study's authors nail it right here. They say, point blank, that the dominance of this assembly line model is the very thing holding back the positive effect of all those high-tech exports. It's a structural issue.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's that you can't just look at the label on the box. Seeing high-tech goods doesn't tell the whole story. You have to peek inside and ask, okay, but how much of this was actually made in Mexico versus just put together in Mexico? And that leaves us with a really big, challenging question. Maybe solving this trade puzzle isn't about exporting even more complicated stuff. Maybe it's about fundamentally changing the game, about designing, developing, and building more of those high-value parts at home. It's a puzzle that goes so much deeper than just the numbers on a trade report.